but I hope he feels like he owes the fans and the club, the loyalty to stay with us in League One. But if he decides himself that he wants to go, then that will be the trigger that will instigate that departure. But I really hope he stays. So welcome back to Small Little Lions FC, and there's no doubt that this summer is going to be a really important and exciting transfer window for Birmingham City. A few weeks ago, the retained list was issued, so we know which players were released. We know that the loan players have gone back, so we know which players are still contracted to the club. I was thinking about the other day about the contracted players that, just because they are contracted and they haven't been released by the club doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be with us at the start of next season. So I've identified 8 players that are at risk of either being sold by the club or possibly they will want to leave themselves. So I'm just going to give you the names of the players one by one, just get your thoughts on what you think about whether you'd like to keep them and whether you think they're at risk yourself. And the first one is Dion Sanderson.
So I heard a couple of weeks back he's been linked with Rangers.
Yes.
I don't know how true that is because obviously the transfer market doesn't open for a couple of weeks yet at the time of recording. I am not a massive Dion Sanderson fan, so I actually wouldn't object to him being sold. I think we could get better players for cheaper in League One. And for me, I know there's been a few attitude things behind the scenes as well. Personally, not a huge Sanderson's fan. Wouldn't be surprised to see him go, and also wouldn't be too upset if he went either.
No, and I think I've put him on the list, Matt, because you mentioned he was linked to Rangers. The fact that there's already a club interested in him. I'd like to keep him, if I'm honest. And I know what you're saying. I know that Blues fans, there's mixed opinions on Dion Sanders, particularly towards the back end of last season. I don't think he had the greatest season, but then who at Birmingham City did. I'd like us to keep him, but I think he's at risk of being sold. So even though he's a contracted player, there's a possibility that if enough interest is generated, and less to say, there's not to say that other clubs, in addition to Rangers, might come in for him.
By the way, I think he's a decent-ish player. He's not a bad player. He can definitely play football. For me, it's more of an attitude and the way he carries himself kind of thing for me, Dion Sanderson. I think maybe there's something more there going behind the scenes. But for me, I wouldn't be too bothered, to be perfectly honest, if he did get sold.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
I mean, out of curiosity, how much do you think we'd get for Sanderson if he was to be sold?
Well, we paid just about two and a bit million for him. I think he's probably worth about the same now, maybe slightly less now.
I'd say 1.5.
Yeah, but the club will get what they can for him if we do sell him. I'd like him to sort of knuckle down really and go back to the players that we had when he was on loan.
If he was to stay as well, absolutely no more captaincy. I don't think that's made for him.
No.
I want to see a real pit bull come through the gates and for that to be the new captain.
Yeah, he's a rapper, isn't he? People. Okay, next on my list is
showing your age there.
Next on my list, another player that I think is at risk of being sold by the club is Emmanuel Longello.
It's funny you mentioned his name because he popped up on social media the other day, and Blues fans were saying actually in League One, if he wasn't a left back but a left winger, he could actually really reinvent.
You know what? I've said that so many times last season that you put him in an advanced position, he'll be a much better player. So that's very interesting.
And you know what? If we would have stayed in the Championship, I would have said get him off the wage bill, get a little bit of extra money in. But now we're in League One. I'm not totally against him maybe having a left wing position or maybe improving even the attacking side of his game even more. He's not a left back. He cannot do that side of the game, in my opinion. He's not strong enough. He's not combative enough.
He's competing against Buchanan as well, so he's not going to get picked in front of Buchanan unless Buchanan is injured or suspended.
Yeah. He's a bit clumsy and he lets too many crosses in the box for me as a left back, but in League One, I would like to see him stay, but I'd like to see him develop as a left winger because I think we could have a really exciting talent on our hand there.
Yeah, I do as well. He looks like a really, really young player, but he's 23, which is still young, but he's not like the 19, 20-year-old. So this is the time now where if he is going to develop, he's got to be now next season. Yeah, I think you're right. I think for League One, you know for a fact I've always liked him as a player.
You have actually, haven't you?
And and I know that he's. But the problem, what lets him down, we know as a left back, he's so vulnerable, and that's not his position. So I think if we can play him in a more advanced position, I'd like to keep him as well. Plus, he's a young player as well.
Yeah, he's quick. He can go past players. Remember that goal against QPR at home last season? It was a good goal. He's got a goal in him. He can score. So, contextually now, League One team, I would hold on to Longello. But who knows where the club's head is at? They might want to sell him and cash in.
Next on the list I've got is Christian Bielek.
So probably my most exciting player to see in League One if he stays, but I think he's possibly our highest risk player of being sold. I think he's a brilliant centre-back. We've said many times as a centre mid, went with the ball at his feet past the halfway line, he doesn't know what to do. He's clueless. He turns back towards his comfort zone centre half, doesn't he? He doesn't know.
Yeah.
And when Mowbray came in, he was doing this shoehorning around the back. But as a centre back, I think he's quality. I think he could be the best, possibly the best League One centre half if he stays. High risk of him being sold.
I think with him, I think the decision's with him. Like, I think the club will want to keep him. The fans will want to keep him.
Yeah.
But if he wants to go, like he did at Derby, he didn't want to go and play in League One, then there's not really the club can do too much about that. So I hope, that he... I really hope he stays.
Same.
I think as a centre half, I think he's going to be brilliant in League One. But I hope he feels like he owes the fans and the club, the loyalty to stay with us in League One. But if he decides himself that he wants to go, then that will be the trigger that will instigate that departure. But I really hope he stays.
But hopefully, if he can look past last season, the whole Rooney debacle, 7 managers, and we can sell him the project, and he sees a new manager come through the door, his vision, he gets along, and there's transfers coming through, he might stay because he knows it's a long-term goal, it's a long-term vision. So who knows? I would love him to stay. I think he'd be brilliant, but I do think he's high risk of moving on.
He is high risk, isn't he, as well? Next on my list, Matt, that I've identified as a potential risk of leaving is Janine Bakuna.
Yeah. And with the price tag I've been rumouring and hearing around, I wouldn't be too fussed again.
How much you been hearing?
I've been hearing somewhere between 5 and 8 million.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that's very good money for someone like Bakuna. I think that's good money for someone who's a bit unpredictable. We all know when Bakuna's on his day, he's world class. He could be a high championship, low-end Premiership player on his day when he's firing on all cylinders. But that's what, 50, 60% of the time?
Yeah.
The other bit, he's useless and he goes invisible. He gives the ball away, doesn't track back. I mean, he's come off the bench several times this season and lost his games, conceded goals because of his, a bit like Dembele. They both frustrate us, don't they, with their lack of tracking back. So for me, high risk. I think he will be sold, actually. I think if they can get 5 to 8 million, they'll cash in on that. And me, personally, I won't lose any sleep over that.
No, I'm pretty much in agreement with that. I like Bakuna, but
I like him.
It's the inconsistency that you mentioned. You can't have that. If you're going to be a competitive team, you've got to have players that 50 to 60% of the time isn't enough. And you're right, we've had games where he's literally been almost mesmerising with what he's done.
Yeah.
But then sometimes he thinks he can do that all the time. He overplays it and he just loses the ball. So I would like to keep him, but... if a decent offer came in for him, I would, obviously we can use that money elsewhere. But, he is at risk, and that depends on whether he wants to stay as well, probably.
Apparently, again, behind the scenes, Tony Mowbray said it, like he said, he's a mad as a hatter, and he's good to have around the camp, good for morale. Like, he's a team player. He speaks to people. He's a good laugh. He likes to have a bit of a mess about on the pitch. Not in a silly way, but apparently I think he's the kind of player sometimes that you need in a group to ease the tension, to make things a little bit lighter from time to time. But a small little side note. But for me, I wouldn't lose any sleep if Bakuna left. But I do quite like him. But
one final thing on him for me, I really respect the fact that he's the only Blues player that I can remember that came out and actually apologised for relegation in social media. Actually really apologised to the fans. So fair play to him for that.
And sorry, one last thing on Bakuna, especially at the start of the season when we got off to a little bit of an injury problem. He was mucking in at right back. He was doing his fair share right wing back. He was doing his fair share. So he did muck in at the start of the season. But for me, just that inconsistency. Yeah,
absolutely. Next on my list is Koji Miyoshi.
Koji Miyoshi. Yeah. So I like Miyoshi. I think he could do some serious damage in League One because we've seen what he's capable of doing in the Championship. Again, prone to going a bit invisible in games. Could we question his physicality, stick him in the weight room, get a bit of strength behind him because we've seen him get knocked off in the Championship. If you get knocked off the ball at that level in League One, you really are going to get the legs kicked out of you. So I like him. I would like to see him stay.
Me too. Yeah.
But again, he's at high risk of leaving. I think a lot of Championship clubs will be interested in Miyoshi.
I think he'll go.
Yeah,
I think he'll go. I like him. I'd like him to stay, and all the reasons you mentioned as well. He's a little bit lightweight at times. Gets shoved off the ball too quick. And this
good player though.
There's no disputing that. But you're only good if you got the ball. You're not good on your backside.
No, absolutely.
You haven't got the ball. So I think that I think he'll go. I hope he doesn't. I'm making that clear. I don't want him to go. I'd like him to stay, but I think he's at high risk. Also, as well, you're going to get picked in the Japanese team if he's in League One.
Yeah, that's true. The Japanese team won't look any lower than the Championship in English football.
Well, so he's going to have to leave, isn't he, really? Which would be sad if he goes, but I'll be very surprised if he's with us for next season.
Again, just quickly, how much do you think would be looking for Miyoshi?
I'm not sure. I mean, you got to bear in mind that the players' values because of last season have depreciated. Because no player covered themselves in glory.
2 million?
I'd be thinking a little bit more than that, maybe 3 to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say between 2 to 4. So
Yeah,
again, we're in the same ballpark.
maybe I'm being a bit generous there, but we get something for him.
Yeah. I'd say 2. I'd say 2. I'd be buzzing with 5. I'd be quite happy with that. I think 5 would be a good deal, but 2 would be reasonable market value.
Yeah. And actually, a very similar situation, really, in terms of an international. My next player is Paik.
Yeah, I think he could be going as well. At the moment, as we know on social media, he's doing that military service in South Korea. Mowbray brought him in. I remember the Sunderland game and the Blackburn game in particular. He was absolutely on fire. Again, high risk. I think he will be sold again. I think he'll be looking for the door, if I'm honest, Paik.
Yeah, I liked him when he first came as well. But I also think as well, look at him and you can tell that he's a decent player.
He's a good player.
But I think he'd be a better player with better players around him. So I think partly his lack of or downturn in form towards the end of the season was a result of also the players around him as well. He did score that goal. He only scored the only goal against Norwich, which is the only goal he scored for us, which unfortunately wasn't enough to keep us up. But you know what? He's been linked as well, hasn't he? I don't know with who, but there's rumours that other clubs are interested in him. I think Sunderland were in for him when we were, and possibly might come back in for him.
He did make us a lot front-footed. He made us, before he came in, we were always looking backwards, shoehorning around. Him and Dazal, when they did come in, they did change that dynamic a little bit. So credit to him for going forward, looking for the front pass, looking for the progressive thing to do moving forward.
Yeah, and he's in the same position as Miyoshi. He's a South Korean international, and
might not look below the Championship as well.
Yeah, so playing in League One's not going to be of a major benefit to him. Okay, I've only got 2 more players on my. Again, just bear in mind, viewers, that these are players that I've selected that I think are potentially at the greatest risk of not being or leaving the club for one reason or another during the summer. And the last but one is Siriki Dembele.
Again, he didn't turn up to the award ceremony. I think that's a pretty clear message when players don't do that. By the way, Bielek did that as well. Didn't turn up, so who knows whether that was a sign of things to come. I think Dembele could be an absolute beast in League One if he wanted to stay around. Again, physicality, he can get nudged off. His decision making sometimes in the final third is questionable, but his flair and his talent is undisputed. He's a very good player on his day. Against the inconsistency, isn't it? And it's his lack of ability to do the dirty side of the game, which Gary Rowett insinuated in his final interview. Tracking back, he doesn't do that very well. But we could potentially build a system where he'd be more productive in the attacking part of the game anyway. However, I think he'll be sold. I think not because the club, I think he might force an exit, if I'm going to be totally honest. I don't think he wants to play League One football. But again, I sound like really brutal, like I'm not losing any sleep over these players going, but again, I think there's just as higher quality players in League One for the price tag of what Siriki Dembele would go for that would give us more.
Yeah, I can't see him playing in League One.
No.
For himself, I can see him playing in League One.
Think he's too good for League One, do you mean?
Well, I think he thinks he's too good for League One. And I think the problem is that because of what we saw last season, and a lot of managers, particularly towards the end of the season, weren't picking him because they were realising, as good as you are going forward, he was only being used as an impact sub rather than a player of his quality should be on for the full 90 minutes. But he weren't trusted enough by the managers to do that because he might score a goal at the other end, but if he then results in not getting back and conceding a goal at our end, then he's nullified his goal. So basically, he's a neutral player. My final one, and this is going to be a fairly interesting one because there's a lot of speculation about this player, and that's Jordan James.
Yeah. Again, I think he's nailed on to go. The rumours have been circulating. I know there's been a couple of Premier League teams in for him. Atalanta's been the biggest rumour. I believe the price tag is somewhere between 5 and 10 million. And, I like Jordan James. I think he's a good player. He's 19, Welsh international. He's really come on at Birmingham City in the last couple of years. Me and you, Dad, have spoke. He's gone from boy to man, hasn't he? His physicality's there now. I wish the consistency in his positioning was there last season. We saw him a lot on the right, a lot on the left, defensive.
That's not his fault, though.
It's not his fault.
He plays where he's picked, doesn't
he? But my point in making that reference, though, is that he's a much better centre attacking mid because he's creative. He can be creative. He can shoot at distance, and he's a good player. I think he's an overrated player. I don't necessarily believe the hype myself. I think he's okay. He can have moments where his movement isn't great. He can go invisible in games. His passing can be sloppy. But let's not take that away from a good player. He's a very good player. But I think he's nailed on to make a transfer. And if we
Yeah.
can get 10 million, again, I think that's a good investment.
Yeah, I think out of all the players in the squad, particularly as we talk at the moment during this podcast, he's the one that's had the most speculation about a move. There's a few Prem clubs interested: West Ham,
Yeah.
Leicester, obviously Atalanta have reignited their interest from January. Two things for me: I'd like Blues to offer him a longer deal, so I'd like to keep him, but for all the reasons you've mentioned, if he was sold and we got a really decent fee for 8 to 10 million, 7, 8, 9, 10 million, I think then I wouldn't lose any sleep if he was sold either. So he's going to be an interesting one. Because if he's there at the start of the season, I'll be happy with that. If he's sold and we got a good fee for him and we can use that in the transfer market, then I'm just as happy with that.
If we could get 10 million, I think we're laughing all the way to the bank on that one.
Yeah. I mean, I have got other players as well. I was going to talk about our forwards, but we haven't got any. So obviously the only one is Tyler Roberts, but he's got such a long contract, and I think he's got something to prove. I think he'll definitely stay, Tyler Roberts.
Well, you said you've got 8. I've got 2 on my computer.
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Just honourable mentions, because again, contracted players, and we'll throw them both in the one in the interest of time. What are your thoughts on Lee Buchanan and Ethan Laird? Just two quick fire rounds on these 2.
Well, this is very simple. I want to keep both of them.
Yeah, same. But do you think they're at risk of going?
I didn't identify them when I did that transfer. So obviously, by that nature, I think that they're probably less at risk. I mean, let's be honest, mate. Every contracted player, if we get the right price and they want to go, any player could go.
Yeah.
I've picked 10 that I think are most at risk. I think because of the size of their contracts, the length of their contracts, I think that they'll both stay. I mean, to me, Buchanan, he's got to stay.
Why?
Because I think he's such a crucial player in that left back position as a naturally left-footed player. I think he's going to be. He's probably in a really poor season our most consistent player last season.
I'd say so.
So
Very up there, definitely.
I know I know Blues fans. Some of the matches he had poor games. I get that. I understand that.
Yeah.
But over the course of that season, he had a very, very consistent season compared to other players. I like Laird as well. I think Laird is one of those players where he was in competition with Cody Drama, and if I'm honest, I slightly edged toward Cody Drama in that position. And if we could get him back, then I'd be very, very happy with that. But I think Laird's still got lots to prove, and I think he's going to be a good, important player for next season. So I'd like to see him stay as well.
Yeah, I think they're both at risk of being sold. I do. I definitely Buchanan, only because he is similar to Bielek. He's one of the players in the squad who's actually proven he can play at the higher level. So if anything, he deserves to play at the Championship level. All the rest of them haven't really proven much, haven't they? So for me, Bielek and Buchanan are the 2 which if they do get a transfer back into the Championship, arguably deserve it. The rest of them, I don't think do. So I would love to see Buchanan stay. I'd love to see Laird stay as well. I think Laird in League One could be fantastic. For him, it's more about injury, isn't it? Keeping him fit, especially in League One, because he's going to get lumped.
Yeah.
Again, Laird had a bit of an underwhelming end to the season, couple of games there. I like him, good player. I do prefer Cody Drama. 2 good players, and I hope they stay.
Yeah. Interestingly, is that you've picked 2 players that you think are at potential risk of being sold. I've picked 8. That's 10. We've released about 6 players. The 5 loan players gone back. So if everybody gets sold that we've suggested may be sold, we've got about 5 players.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, and fair enough. You've just asked me, and by the way, I didn't know what players you were going to throw at me, did I?
No.
You've just threw them at me in the room. But unobjectively, we need to keep some players around.
Yeah.
So actually, although I've said I won't lose any sleep, I won't do this. I actually want players to stay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying completely clear the squad. But there are a couple of players in there who I think we could get good money for. A couple of good players in there who I want to keep. I hope the recruitment and the management get the balance right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can't sell all of these. Remember, Blues fans, we're looking at players that are at risk of being sold. We're not saying that these players should be sold. Let's make that absolutely clear. We're just discussing the possibility that these are players that are, even though they're contracted to us, there is a potential risk that they could end up going, and we obviously could have and we will have a very different squad at the start of the new season. But what do you think, Blues fans? Obviously we've been through a fair few players there. Is there any players that we haven't mentioned, which I don't think there's many left, to be honest, that you think might be at risk of potentially being sold or wanting to leave? Let us know in the comments below. It's always great to hear your comments. And as always, we hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't checked us out on our social media channels already, make sure you go across to our X page and our Instagram page, and you'll see those handles appearing on the screen right now. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future content all about Birmingham City. And myself and Matt will see you on the next video.